Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look at installing the Roadmaster diode wiring kit on a 2016 GMC Terrain. Now this is going to be available in a few different configurations based on what needs you may have. So if you don't have an umbilical to attach from your 6-pole to your 7, you can get it with 3 different styles. There's a straight cable, a hybrid cable, or a coiled cable. So depending on what your application may be, you can pick that up with it, and it's also going to include that 6-pole. Now as far as wiring go, you can get it as bare wire or with a 4-pole end attached to it. So whatever you may need, there's a kit available for your needs. Now when flat towing your Terrain, there's going to be 5 main components required for flat towing, and the first one's going to be a base plate, and that's going to be the attachment point for all of your components, and it's attached to the frame of the vehicle, creating a nice sturdy mounting point. Going along with that, you have safety chains, which are, in case of a disconnect, it's going to hold everything together, and that way the car is not getting disconnected. Now, between your base plate and the hitch on the RV, you are going to have your tow bar, and that is simply that connection point that allows it to pivot as you're going down the road. Now, you're also going to have a supplemental braking system, and that way when you apply the brakes on the RV, it's going to transmit to the towed vehicle, bringing it to a slow or stop, and also you have a breakaway cable with that, and that way, in case of a catastrophic disconnect, it's going to pull that brake, this switch here, applying the brakes on the vehicle, bringing it to a stop. That way it's not rolling down the highway. Now on this vehicle, you do want to take a look at the Roadmaster Fuse Master, because you're supposed to pull a fuse for the ABS module, and that way the steering doesn't get kind of out of whack as you're towing. And we have videos available for that Fuse Master to make sure you get that installed. And something else that I recommend is also getting a charge line. And that's going to simply trickle charge the battery on your towed vehicle and keep that battery nice and charged while going down the road. And that's pretty easy to tie in with your diode wiring, so I recommend doing that while you have that installed. Diode wiring is becoming more and more popular on flat-towed vehicles. Many times you've probably seen the magnetic lights that stick on top, and you're going to have to run that to either a 4-pole or a 6-pole or 7-pole on your RV. Well, diode wiring makes it nice and easy by tapping into your factory lighting, and then it runs to a 6-pole mounted on the front of the vehicle. So that way when you hook up your umbilical, it's going to transmit all the light sequences to the rear of your towed vehicle, including your running lights, your turn signals, as well as your brake lights. Now, many braking systems are going to require diode wiring to tap into it. We use it in Air Force One from Demco today, which doesn't, but if you have a stay and play Duo, something you're going to want to take in consideration is running that diode wiring up into the engine bay to make it a little bit easier for splicing in. But as far as installation goes, the main thing is you're just running your wiring from the front of the vehicle at the 6-pole back to your taillights into the pocket, where you are going to be splicing into factory wiring with some spade connectors, which seems a little bit scary, but overall it's pretty easy to do, even with basic wiring skills. So I'm going to walk you through all those steps to make sure you get your diode wiring installed on your Terrain. Now to install diode wiring, the main thing is you have a connection point at the front that eventually makes its way to the taillights, but a lot of your braking systems are going to require diode wiring. Now today we're installing an Air Force One because our coach has air brakes, so we don't need to tie into the diode wiring, but some of your others, like your stay and play Duos, I believe, as well as the InvisiBrake, you're going to have to tie into this. So the main thing that you're going to want to do for that to make it easier is when routing your diode wiring, at this point you'd probably want to pull up an extra loop, maybe about 1 foot, and tape that off, and that way you can splice into those wires nice and easy. But if you aren't having to tie into your diode wiring, you're going to follow the path that we took. And what I did is right here at the front of our base plate, this is where our 6-pole is going to mount up. So I just taped my diode wiring, and this red wire is a charge line. This is something that's going to tie into our 6-pole and trickle charge our battery as we tow the vehicle. So if you're adding a charge line into your flat tow setup, I recommend taping this off at the same time, because when we put our 6-pole on, we can connect it at the same time. Now as far as the diodes, I just kind of routed it up and kind of followed the frame rail. I'll raise up our vehicle and give you a better look how I started to make my path back. Now this is definitely easier if you have your fascia off. So if you're installing a base plate, I recommend installing the base plate and then keep the fascia off until you have your breakaway switch, your diode wiring and charge line, and whatever other components you may have on the front ran already. Otherwise it's kind of tricky to get all this ran when the fascia is in the way. Now, some tips to follow along as you're running your wires. Stay away from anything that's going to be hot or moving, whether it be suspension, axles, sway bars, whatever it may be. We don't want to damage our wire. And the best thing that I've found normally is following existing wire loom or maybe hard lines that have brackets that you can attach to. Generally, that's a pretty safe path. This one here, I just kind of zip tied up along the frame rail, and throughout the whole process, just run your wires, get the nice tension, and then zip tie it in place. And then I got to this little triangulation arm here that bolts up to the frame, and I zip tied this up. Now here I have the rest of my diode wiring, and something that I'm going to do, just kind of help us out later on, is peel back our white wire. We need to run a ground to the chassis, and you can really do it anywhere along here, but the more you peel back, that leaves a little bit more wire for us to use as a jumper wire when we get to our running lights. So peel your white wire back, and since our running light goes from one taillight to the other, you want to have at least, I would say, 5 or 6 foot, and that way you can go from one taillight to the other, and we're going to have plenty here. But this is also going to be a good point to put our self-tapping screw. Now I've chosen this point because there's really no great way for me to attach this anywhere. You could run along here, but I'm going to choose to run it kind of on the outside and use this frame channeling to make it a little bit easier. But as this wire dangles, I'm going to be putting a loom clamp with a self-tapping screw, and I'm going to be using this white wire as a ground screw and that self-tapper at the same time as our wire loom clamp, and that way it's kind of twofold. It's going to hold our wire up, but also we're going to be able to get that ground. So I'll cut my wire and then just strip back a portion of it. And you're going to take the included ring terminal that comes with the diodes, and you can give those wires a quick twist, and then we'll just crimp this down. And anytime you make any electrical connection with a crimp style, I highly recommend just kind of giving a quick tug. Make sure that wire's not going to come loose long term. So now we'll just take our self-tapping screw, and again, you may not have a loom clamp. You can pick one of these up separately, and this is just going to tidy this up, but also get our ground made with our ring terminal connection. So I'll pass my self-tapper through here. And this is part of the chassis here. It's raw metal, so I think this is going to be a good spot for us to get this tapped in. Now with your self-tappers, you may be tempted to just kind of go pretty hard on it. You don't want to. You want it to where your ring terminal is not going to move around at all or spin. But any tighter than that, you run the risk of kind of stripping out the threads that it's making. So just make sure that it's snug, and that should be good enough. Now with my loom clamp and ground now attached, I'm going to continue with my wiring, passing it through the channels here on the frame and make my way back towards the taillights. Now I trace my wires through the frame. There's a little channel, and then eventually I need to make my way back over for the cross member. So I just kind of went over here and just kind of ran it along. You can see the hard lines. These brackets here become good little spots to zip tie up. Don't zip tie it up to the hard lines. We don't want that to chafe. But as we kind of make our way back, we're shooting to get to this rear cross member, and that's because we need to split our wires up. So at this point, I'm going to take our 3 wires, and our yellow and brown are going to go to our left turn signal, and it's going to be our running light. And that white wire that we peeled back, I've ran it across the hitch, making a junction between the two, so you can go ahead and do that. But as I peel back our green, we'll peel this back to the cross member, and then I'm going to run these to both sides of the vehicle so we can get to our taillight pocket. So where I split off on the rear cross member, I used this brace that kind of goes to the other portion of it to kind of route this over behind some of the wires, making sure to stay away from the muffler, and then finally made my way back to where we're going to run this up to the taillight pocket. Same thing kind of on the passenger side. I used that brace, and again just made my way over, attached it here. I just zip tied up to the exhaust hanger, and then utilized the hitch to mount that up. Now the same thing goes for that white wire. Just simply ran that across our hitch, draped it over on both sides. I have definitely enough to be able to pull that up. So at this point, I'm going to lower down our vehicle, and we'll start by taking our taillights out. So now we need to get our taillight taken out and gain access to the factory wiring. And there's just some plastic covers here. You just have a slot on the bottom that allows you to pry this up, and that's going to give us access to our hardware. I'm not 100% sure if this is factory hardware, but if it is, it's going to be a 10mm screw to get this removed. And once that hardware's out, what I always recommend is just kind of bounce your taillight just side to side to loosen it up. There's some tabs that it pops into, and sometimes this can get a little bit tricky. So what I do is just kind of push it from the back end and try to pull this out until we get those tabs to release. So you can see where those are located. So if you need to, you can pry a little bit with a plastic trim tool. Now this vehicle is already set up for trailer wiring. So it plugs in, it's got its T wiring here. So what we're going to focus on though is the wiring that's coming from the vehicle, and this is where we're going to splice in our diodes. So I'm going to go ahead and test our wiring to make sure which ones we're going to be tying into, and then I'll let you know which ones we'll need to splice in. Now I've gone ahead and tested our wires to figure out our running light, which also will be tied into the other one with our jumper wire, and then our turn signal and brake light share the same wire. So I've determined here that we have a yellow with a black stripe and a brown wire. The yellow with the black stripe is our stop and turn, and our brown's our running light. Now it's going to get kind of tight here, so I want to make sure that we have a nice pocket for this, for our diodes to sit. And I think kind of right about in this area is kind of what I'm going to target. So if you have any sheathing or insulation on your wires, go ahead, you can get that peeled off. We want to separate it, and that way it stays nice and clean. We're going to put a little bit of electrical tape on it later. But what I'm going to do is once I'm happy with the length, I'm going to go ahead, cut my wires, that yellow and black and brown, and then go through and strip back each of the ends here. Now using, looks like our 20 gauge stripper portion, or 18 gauge should work on these. They're fairly small wires. And now we're going to grab our diode, and there's spade connectors on the ends. We're going to just use the blue ones, so peel off 4 of the blue ones. And these wires are fairly small, so if you need to, you can strip it back a little bit further and bend them over just a little bit so they get a little bit more bite in those spade connectors. It's not completely necessary here, but with all of them, I do recommend giving it kind of a quick tug once you crimped it down, just to make sure it's going to stay in place. You don't want to have to go back and trace any wires. So with that one on there, that's nice and tight. I'm going to go ahead and get the other 3 remaining ones in place. So now we need to pull up the wires that we ran to the back, and I'm using an airline tube. You can use a piece of wire, whatever you have handy. You can see daylight kind of if you look down through the pocket, and that's where my airline tube is going to come out. And I'm going to just take some electrical tape and tie up our wires that we ran, and then pull these up. So with my wires taped up to that airline, I'll go ahead and pull these up, making sure that I have all of my wires. It looks like I lost my white one, so I'll go back and get that one fished up. So we'll just pull these wires up, and I do definitely have some extra here, so I'm going to go ahead and just kind of cut these off. Now, the white wire is going to be the jumper. That's our excess, and that's going to be jumping to the running light signal, which is going to be the brown wire. So right now, we'll go ahead and strip these both back. And you can strip this a little bit longer since we're going to be tying them together. And this is where we take the yellow spade connector, as it's made for a larger gauge, or at least 2 wires put together. Twist this together, and then we'll crimp this down. And then we'll put a blue one on our yellow. And now we can start the connection process to our diodes. So go ahead, take one of the diodes that doesn't have any connectors on it, and start with, grab your plug, and the wires that we trimmed here first, we're going to take one of the diodes and put it on the out. So brown, yellow, doesn't matter at this point. We'll do the same for our other diode. And then the corresponding wires that we have cut from that, we just tie that in. Doesn't matter which one, so you can put it on the left or right. And then with our new wires, our brown we determined was the running light. So we're going to go ahead with the brown and white wire with our yellow spade and put that here. And then our yellow is going to go to the yellow and black. So at this point, what I like to do is kind of tape everything up. We don't want any stress to be able to pull those wires out. So these have double-sided tape. You can stick these together, but I always take a little bit of electrical tape, wrap it around all the connections here, and that way they're not pulling loose. There's no extra stress that's put on the wires. So I'll go ahead and get that cleaned up, and then I'm going to mount it right about here. That should give us the clearance for us to be able to get our taillight put back in, so make sure you have it all plugged up, and then we'll head over to the other side. Now I've gone ahead and taped this up, so it's going to be a little bit hard to see, so I apologize for that. But the wires that we tied into are going to be a brown, again, for our running lights. So just make sure that that white wire that you pull up is going to run to that, and that's that jumper from the other. And then the green and white is going to be that turn signal and stop. So that's where our green wire that we pulled up goes to. So I've gone ahead, got that taped up. We'll get our taillight put back in place, and then we'll head up to the front of the vehicle where we can make our attachment to the 6-pole. So now that we have everything tied up, we can go ahead and take our tape off the front here. And we'll take the boot off of our 6-pole. So just peel this back, and we're going to slide this up on the wiring. And then at this point, we'll just split up our wires so you can just kind of cut in between these and peel them back a little bit. And then we can strip back the ends. Now you don't have to strip back too much. I would say maybe 1/4 of an inch should be fine. And just as a reminder, if you are doing your charge line, we're going to do this at the same time. Now our 6-pole has very small Phillips head screws that tighten down on the wire once you feed them into the channels. So be careful, don't back them out all the way. They're very, very hard to find if you drop them and also to get back in. So I'll start here on this long center pole. That's going to be where we put our charge line wire. And when you tighten this down, you don't have to get too crazy. You just want it snug to where it's going to hold itself in. If you go any tighter than that, you run the risk of damaging the connection and the wire in there. So I'll go ahead, I'm going to continue. There's letters embossed on the 6-pole that will determine where the wires go. So I'm going to go ahead, I'll get these hooked up, and then I'll show you exactly where they go. So starting at our 12 o'clock position, you'll see the letters TM. That's going to be our tail markers, which is going to be our brown wire. Next we have a white wire, which is GD, going to ground. LT is going to be left turn, so that'll be our yellow. And then RT is going to be our right turn signal, so that's our green. Now, what I'll do a lot of times is put a little bit of black RTV silicone in all of these connections just to kind of keep water from building up. You got to realize that this is going to live on the front of the vehicle, so it's really important that we make sure that moisture doesn't get into here. I'm just going to coat this all up. This is going to prolong the life of our plug here. And just kind of make sure that that's all gooped nice. And then we'll take our boot and slide it over. And then with electrical tape, I'm just going to wrap this seam again just to kind of help prevent any moisture from getting in there. Now at this point, you do have a little bit of wire loom, and since this lives on the front of the vehicle, you don't want to see all these colored wires just kind of hanging out. So to give it a little bit cleaner look, I'm going to go ahead with my wire loom, tuck our wires in there. And then we can tuck this wire loom into the boot by just kind of overlapping itself, making it a little bit smaller diameter. And then we're just going to kind of feed this in here. And then I'm going to take electrical tape, wrap that all up as well. Now to mount our 6-pole onto our base plate, depending on the base plate you have, if they have tabs like this, it makes it super easy to be able to just kind of put your self-tapping screws in place here, and that's going to hold it in. If not, there's a bracket that comes with the diodes that you can utilize as well. So So now with that mounted up, we do need to go ahead and test this. And I'm going to be using a test box, which is going to simulate running through the light sequence on an RV. So since you don't have a test box, best thing you can do is get your umbilical that comes with your diode wiring kit, and you're going to want to attach the end onto it. If you have a tow bar that has channeling that you can run it through, I suggest doing that to give you a nice clean, little bit of cable management. But hook this up to the 7-pole on your RV, run through the light sequence, and check the taillights on the vehicle to make sure that everything's corresponding. So when you run through your light sequence, you go ahead, do the running lights, and then you can do your left turn signal, your right turn signal, and then finally the brake lights. So with our lights tested and everything's working great, our diode wiring is officially installed. Now again, if you are using a different braking system than we are today, like our Air Force One, you are going to have to tie into that. So just double check to make sure that that lighting function is still working after you tie into it. So all that's left to do is get the rest of our flat toe components back in place, our front fascia on, and then we can start getting ready to get this thing on the road. And that was a look and installation of the Roadmaster diode wiring kit on a 2016 GMC Terrain.